Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. This is the final show of the week. Hope you all are excited. My name as always is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all yet again for tuning in. And today's show should be a great one to close out the week. We've been talking about a lot of interesting NFL and college football games that have huge fantasy implications this weekend. And then we're going to take a sneak peek into some betting and fantasy advice for Sunday night's football's game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Should be a fascinating show. Also, if you have any comments about last night's game, that's a very interesting topic that I would love to dissect. So let me know in the comments if you want to talk about last night's game, and I will gladly oblige. But before we get into our show at large, I do want to remind you yet again, and if you feel so inclined, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network. It's a great way to contribute to the show. It's greatly appreciated by all concerned here at the network, especially me and my fellow podcasters. Another great way to contribute and interact with the show on hand is making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. You can click on the $ to make your comment really pop, and I will address as many comments as I can, whether it be just a Super Chat or a Super Thanks. So, if you feel so inclined toward the show, like I said, any burning questions, comments, or concerns, especially about last night's game, because we could go on and on about that, I'm all ears. But without further ado, let us jump right into today's show. Starting off with some big NFL games this weekend with pretty important, significant fantasy implications as well. All three of the games that I've chosen are either going to be very tactical battles between these two teams, or they have the propensity to be games that really are explosive for both sides' concerns. Without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment, starting off with a pretty big game in the AFC that we've talked about all week long. Bills-Texans. This is a marquee QB battle, as well as wide receiver battle, as Stephon Diggs is taking on his former team for the first time, I believe. But there is news about 2 hours ago coming from ESPN concerning the state of some of Buffalo's players in terms of injuries. They are now going to be down 3 starters. One of them in question is Khalil Shakir on the offensive side of the football. Obviously, one of Josh Allen's early go-to targets, presumably becoming very quickly the wide receiver 1 over there in Buffalo. They have lost him at least for this game. And on the defensive side of the ball as well, they are very thin. They could be down both linebackers yet again in Terrell Bernard and Teron Johnson, both limited participants as well in this week's practices. And they are questionable to come back. But now you have lost 2 of your better defensive linemen in Ed Oliver and Austin Johnson for this game as well. And on the back end of things, you lose safety Taylor Rapp. So it's not looking good both offensively and defensively for the Buffalo Bills. But yet again, like I said throughout the week, the reason why I'm so honed in on the QB battle is because, not for nothing, I wouldn't necessarily describe both of their play thus far as erratic, but it has been kind of going through the motions, if you catch my drift. It's been very, kind of lackluster in terms of how both of these quarterbacks projected. And for Allen, through only one game, I kind of feel like this is one of those games where you have to look at both of these quarterbacks' resumes through the first 4 weeks of the season and say, well, both of them have had some impressive moments, but they really haven't been living up to the lofty expectations we project them to. And so, going into this game, I'm really questioning whether or not either of these guys is going to really shine. That being said, both of these defenses aren't necessarily the best. I would say the Texans now profile as a better defense in this game. They just have a little bit more depth up front and in the back end in the secondary. But don't count out the Bills in this game. I did say that both of these quarterbacks would disappoint on a fantasy end of things, but it could give opportunities to different players to really step up and make the difference in this game. So that's why this game is a really weird one to monitor in terms of fantasy, because both of these guys, we know they're excellent fantasy QBs. But to what extent can they prove us right in this game. And the second game I want to talk about for this weekend slate that could be very interesting from a fantasy perspective. How about the Cardinals going against the 49ers? Now, the thing about this game, right, when I was thinking about this before the show, I think this is more going to say a lot about Brock Purdy than it is the profile of the Cardinals offense, because at the very least, we know, to some degree, the Cardinals offense runs hot and cold. We know that they're electrifying some moments, very disappointing run-of-the-mill in others. So this game could really project to be a blowout, or, the Cardinals put up a feisty battle. But on the San Fran side of things, this is one of those games where I'm not necessarily concerned about Brock Purdy, right? Because he's proven that he's more or less someone you can rely upon, at least in real life. Maybe not in fantasy, because he's someone on my personal fantasy team who I can't make heads or tails of week in, week out. But at least he's proven that he's more than a system QB the past couple of weeks. But in games like this, in an NFC West division that could be more competitive than people think, the Seattle Seahawks already off to a great start. I think you gotta set the tone in these divisional games and remind people why you are the cream of the NFC West, why you are one of the better teams in the NFC, perhaps the best team in the NFC. Yes, you're fighting a lot of injury battles, fighting on all fronts, offensive and defensive. That's no excuse for, going up against a Cardinals team that you should kind of beat down a little bit and laying an egg. I'm not saying that that's going to be what happened, because I have the 49ers winning this game and semi-comfortably, but I think that in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the 49ers right now, they are a team that throughout the regular season have these questionable games against certain teams that really show they may have more weaknesses than we think. We saw it against Minnesota. We saw it against the Rams. If they play a full game, against weaker opposition, then I'll be more convinced that they'll be able to weather the storm of whatever injuries come up with them. But for now, I can't necessarily, say that this game could be a 49ers complete blowout. But then the last game that I wanted to talk about, how about our London game? Taking place in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, lovely stadium by the way. If you're ever abroad, you might want to check it out. One of the better high-end stadiums in the world, in my opinion. But this game is going to be either one of those classic shootouts in an international game, or it's going to be a really tactical game between two defenses that are slowly starting to coalesce. The Vikings more so than the Jets, but still, I have faith in this Jets defense. It's going to come down to, of all things, both of these teams' body clocks. How do they acclimate to London time? How do they acclimate to the pressure of playing internationally and wanting to appeal to an international market, most importantly? And so, both of these guys have played epic battles in the past, if you can believe it, when Aaron Rodgers was a Packer and Sam Darnold was a Jet, and people are talking about, this can be Sam Darnold's revenge game. I think that they could be right in that regard, because the Vikings look like they could be the fresher team in this matchup. They certainly have the more talented roster right now, and they're certainly maturing in a way that's further along than the Jets right now. But what this game is going to come down to is which defense rules the day. And I feel like both of these defenses are somewhat battle-tested enough to kind of rule the roost in this game. And not for nothing, as much as I love both of these QBs and I want them to shine abroad, I feel like, yes, Sam Darnold looks like one of the better QBs in the league, but I haven't necessarily seen him in this situation before, where, there's a lot of positives. You go abroad, weird game, weird time zone. And when you're so high, sometimes you have the propensity to come crashing down. On the Aaron Rodgers side of things, he did not look good, albeit in ugly conditions last week against Denver. So this game could be a very weird one. I might shy away from a betting perspective, but at least in a fantasy perspective, be wary that yes, there are big names in this game that could go off. You know what I mean? There's Justin Jefferson, as always. Garrett Wilson could have a better game abroad. Priest Hall, potentially. But at the end of the day, what I'm looking for from this game is a lot of defensive stands. Because I feel like this is the game where we finally get to see the Vikings test a little bit to their limits. No, through no fault of their own, because they might be a bit jet lagged in this one. Same for the Jets, but I kind of feel like this one's going to come down to, which defense, generates more pressure or has more takeaways, rather than, a significant big play on the offensive side of the ball from either Rodgers or Darnold. But these three games, definitely, could have picked three different ones, but from a fantasy perspective, you can't go wrong with either of them. They're very fickle, volatile games that could go either way. There could be a lot of points in some of them. There could be a premium of points in others. But as of right now, these are the three games that I really think, if you're a fantasy football manager, you really want to be wary of. Because it's a lot of highs on all of these teams and a lot of lows. And there's no really perfect team or situation where you could feel certainly comfortable with who you pick for your team. But let me know what you think in the comments, because this definitely can be a situation to monitor as the weekend goes on. But when we come back on the other side, we transition from the NFL to college for just a little bit, talk about some of the big games in college football this weekend with massive fantasy implications, albeit not many top 25 ones. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.